Greetings, heroes. It is I, your friendly neighborhood Rabbi John Carrier, and I'm here tonight to talk to you about Shabbat. Now, this is a live studio recording for the Jew Curious Show podcast. So if you're not familiar with that stuff, in addition to having this YouTube channel for about the last 3 years now, for say about the last 6 months, I've had this great podcast called the Jew Curious Show. And some episodes we have interviews with guests like Rabbi Daniel Ruttenberg, Rabbi Brad Hirschfield, Rabbi Bradley Shavit Hartzen, Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson, take two. And we have musicians like Joey Weissenberg. We recently had this great guest, Sarah Klegman, who is one of the pioneers behind Holla Hub. And so we have lots of great guests, but also sometimes we do these live Q&A sessions. So if this is your first time seeing my YouTube channel, then you should know I've got about 170 odd videos out there, long ones, short ones. Lately I've been doing more YouTube live in this format so that people could get together with me, listen to some Torah that I want to teach, and ask your questions live. And so if you're out there right now, if you are lurking, that's cool. You just watch and learn, and that's fine. You can lurk as long as you lurk and learn, as I say. However, I would love it if you would take advantage of this live YouTube format to ask me some questions. Now, I've got a few things that I want to get off my chest. I've got a few things I want to teach this evening, but I am also here to answer your questions live for the sake of the Jew Curious Show podcast audience. So if you ask me a question tonight, if it's a worthwhile question, not just a stump the chump kind of thing, or sometimes I get some kooks in there who like to say bad stuff about Judaism or whatever. Forget about that nonsense. But I will say, if you have an earnest question about the topic of Shabbat, feel free to ask it in the chat this evening. I will answer that question live, and then my reading of your question and the recording of my answer will go to the Jew Curious Show podcast audience. So this is a way to take a podcast, which is kind of a static format, if you will. It's hard to have a call-in show, for example, with a podcast, but this is a way to make it more interactive. So if you are catching this on the Jew Curious Show podcast, know that you can get involved with the production of future shows. You can go to this YouTube channel here at the Rabbi John Carrier YouTube channel. You can see when I'm going to be live. You can ask your questions and, God willing, get some answers. So I'd love it if people would give me a little bit of a shout out. Tell me who you are, where you're coming from this evening, and go ahead and type in what questions you have about Shabbat. And then I'm going to teach a little bit, and then after that we'll get into some of the Q&A portion of the show. So before we go any further, let me just see who's already on there for the purposes of shouting out. Okay, let's go to the chat. We've got Daniela Galano. We've got Carmen Zoralda. We've got Teresa's from Cyprus. Hey, what's up, Teresa? Let's see. We've got Daniela from Perth, Australia. Are you kidding me? We are international, y'all. We've got my good friend Whitney coming in from Florida. We've got the G-Man coming in from Thailand. Wow, I had no idea that people in other countries had the internet. Isn't this something? Yeah, that's terribly culturally obtuse of me. So in any case, really glad to have some familiar friends join me, some new people join me for the first time. So we are in just a second going to get into this lesson about Shabbat. Before I do, I want to say a little bracha, a little blessing. We're going to be talking about verses of the Torah tonight and verses of the Tanakh. And so I want to say the blessing for Torah learning, and it goes a little something like this. And after I say the blessing, you can say it along with me at home if you know it, or at work or wherever you are. And you can, or you can just listen to me say it, and then you say Amen where you are. And that's as if you've said the blessing, or you can type Amen into the chat. Let's see if we can get a few amens in here. So here it goes. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, can I get an amen out there in the chat land, or however you say it, with your voice, the mouth on your face, you do you. So let's talk about Shabbat. Tonight's topic is Shabbat, 4 ways to celebrate. And so, and maybe it's not night where you are. Maybe you're watching this on the replay. You're listening to this in the podcast on your way to work in the morning. But right now, it's about 8:30 here in Southern California. So tonight we're going to talk about Shabbat, 4 ways to celebrate. And you may think that you can think of a lot of ways to celebrate Shabbat, much more than 4. I mean, you got the wine, you got that tasty challah, you get that special kind of Brady eggy bread that people have. You can go to services, right? You can sing about Shabbat at the Shabbat evening services on Friday, or in the Shabbat morning services on Saturday. You can eat cake. All sorts of celebrations have cake. You can't bake a cake on Shabbat. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. But you can eat a cake. One of my favorite ways to celebrate Shabbat is hardcore napping, right? I was just talking about this with somebody the other day, where our best night's sleep of the week is on Shabbat. So I'm kind of a night owl. I don't have what I'll call good sleep hygiene. I just kind of work or watch TV or something until I fall asleep, and then I wake up in the middle of the night and I go back to work or go back to watch TV, and then I fall asleep again. So I don't have a lot of like long stretches of uninterrupted sleep, except on Shabbat, because I've got nothing to do the next day unless I'm, going to lead services someplace at like 9 o'clock. That's sleeping in for me. And so I'll sleep for like 8 hours, and then I will take, after services, like a 3-hour nap. So a full night's sleep for any normal human being, plus a 3-hour nap. That is one of my favorite ways to celebrate Shabbat. So all sorts of different things you could do to celebrate this weekly holiday, right? This was maybe the first Jewish holiday there was, or the first human holiday there was, in the sense, if you follow the narrative in the Torah, God created the world in 6 days, and you could take that literally, you could take that metaphorically, if you will. But then God rested. God said, okay, can create the world in 6 days, you deserve a break, right? And so God took a break on that 7th day and said, look, from now on, this is a good thing for everybody, right? You work 6 days, and then you take a day off. And that is, I believe, the gift of the Jewish people to the world, is this notion of taking a day off every 7 days. And so there are lots of different ways to celebrate it. However, tonight I'm going to talk about 4 particular ways that you might not have thought of, because they come directly from the Torah and the Tanakh. And the distinction being, the Torah we talk about is the first 5 books of Moses. And then there's another verse in Sefer Yeshayahu, or the book of Isaiah, that talks about it as well. And in these passages from our scripture, we have 4 verbs that are used to talk about Shabbat. So when I say celebrate, how do you do Shabbat? What's the verb associated with Shabbat besides hardcore napping? And we get 4 of them. I'll just give a quick summary, and then we'll go through them one by one. We have Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. You remember the Sabbath day. That is in Sefer Shemot, in the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 8. The first time we hear the 10 commandments, one of those commandments is Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. Remember the Sabbath day. Another one is Shamor et Yom HaShabbat. When the 10 commandments are repeated in the book of Deuteronomy, in, I believe, chapter 5, verse 12, then it gives the 10 commandments over again, but it changes this wording slightly because it's being spoken, about 39 to 40 years later. Moses is repeating it. And instead of saying, remember the Sabbath day, Moses says, speaking for God, protect the Sabbath day. Some people translate this as observe or keep. I really like the translation protect, because a shomer is like a guard, or somebody who watches something, like a treasury or something like that. So Shamor et Yom HaShabbat is, you're really protecting the Sabbath day to keep it holy. So we've got remember and protect. And then later on in the Nevi'im and the prophets, in Sefer Yeshayahu, or the book of Isaiah, in chapter 58, verse 13, it says that you should honor the Sabbath day and call it a delight. Right? It says you should turn aside from business, but and other worldly things. But it uses these distinctive verbs about Shabbat. You should honor it, and you should delight in it. It says you should call it a kavod. You should call it an honor, and also oneg, which means delight. So if you're keeping score at home, we are supposed to remember the Sabbath day, protect the Sabbath day, honor the Sabbath day, and delight in the Sabbath day. And each of these verbs is related to mitzvot that you may already know about, right? There's things that we do traditionally for Shabbat that, could have been on that long list I talked about earlier, that is connected to one of these four verbs, or these four concepts. And so tonight we're going to talk about each of these sort of in turn, and the mitzvot, the commandments, the way to do holy things that are associated with each of these four ideas. Before I go on any further, I'm going to jump into the chat, see who's out there. We've got Daniela with an amen. We got Teresa, and I think, where's Daniela coming from? I think she said she's coming from Perth, and it's 12:30 in the afternoon there. God bless you. Again, it's about 8:30 in the evening here in sunny Southern California. Not sunny. It's dark outside right now. I got a little confused there. It's been a long day. I know I said I made that complaint yesterday. I think I drove, this is another part of being in Southern California. I think I drove like 4 or 5 hours today just commuting around places, teaching Torah and taking my kids to activities. So been in the car quite a bit. So if I start going like this, it's just habit, really. So let's see what else is going on there. We got 6:30 a.m. in Cyprus. We got some amens. Let's get some questions in here. What's some questions that you have about Shabbat, whether it's how to observe the restrictions about Shabbat, whether it's about lighting the candles, whether it's about saying kiddush with a cup of wine. Later this week, just a bit of a spoiler alert. Later this week, I am going to talk about the specific blessings that we say on a Friday evening for a Shabbat dinner at home. So I'll get more into detail about that in a couple of days. But today, whatever questions you have are fair game, and I'll just let those bubble up in the chat. For right now, let's go to this first way to celebrate Shabbat, and that is Zachor, right, or remember the Sabbath day. And it says remember the Sabbath day, like as if you could forget, like as if, oh, is it Saturday today? Really? Or Friday night? Am I supposed to be doing that? I totally forgot that it was Shabbat, and Shabbat was a thing. I think a better translation of Zachor, it's almost like he's here. It's to commemorate, right? To remind, or it's not to remember in the sense of a mental state, because as I often teach, the Torah is very reticent to command mental states. With rare exception, things like you should rejoice in your sukkah, and that sounds like it says you should be happy that it's Sukkot, but it doesn't say be happy. It says rejoice. It means act happy. Right? It means act like a happy person, because if you act like a happy person, you'll be a happy person. And so when it says remember the Sabbath day, it's not trying to alter your brain or your emotions. It really means to commemorate the Sabbath day, to remind yourself and others, so that everybody can bear in mind that now is Shabbat. And how we do that, according to the Rambam, according to Maimonides, is with Kiddush and Havdalah. So we have Kiddush or Kiddush, depending on how accurate your Hebrew pronunciation is or what part of the world you're from. This is how we commemorate Shabbat. When Shabbat comes in, one of the ways in which we initiate or welcome Shabbat is by reciting Kiddush, or this prayer of sanctification about Shabbat, about the Sabbath day. And so we take a cup of wine traditionally. It could be grape juice. Now, the reason we use wine is not anything special or magical about grapes or the aging process or yeast or all the stuff that goes into wine, even in California where wine is kind of important. It's really about joy. And whenever we have a holiday, or Shabbat as a holiday, or a wedding, or a Brit Milah celebration or Bar Mitzvah, some kind of celebratory Jewish occasion, there's usually a cup of wine. And not because of wine per se, but because wine is sort of a universal Jewish symbol for joy, right? Because wine, in appropriate quantities, can bring you joy. Now, can you use grape juice? Absolutely, especially for children who maybe shouldn't be drinking wine quite yet, or if someone for whom alcohol is bad for them, like if they have some sort of health condition or are in recovery and drinking wine would be detrimental to their health, then you can absolutely use grape juice. In fact, according to the halakha, according to Jewish law, you can use anything pretty much except for water. You can't make kiddush with water, but you can make it with anything else. And it says, okay, if where you live, wine doesn't grow, or it's whatever the celebratory drink is of that place. And so, if you are I don't know if this ever happened, but if you were like a Viking in ancient Sweden or something, you might have mead to make kiddush with. I don't know if any Vikings ever celebrated Shabbat, but let's just pretend if grapes don't grow where you are, but you can get honey and make mead, which is a fermented honey beverage. If mead brings you joy, you can make it with mead. If you're a place where there's no wine, but there's plenty of beer in different places. I think they invented it in Egypt, perfected it in Germany, let's say. Some good French and Belgian beers as well. I'm a bit of a beer aficionado. But if beer is the customary celebratory drink of the place, you can make kiddush with beer. The blessing's a little bit different because the blessing that we say, we bless God for creating the fruit of the vine. And so you might say a different blessing if you're drinking mead or beer or whiskey, or, I come from East Texas, and so it might be said over Dr. Pepper was popular when I was growing up, or Big Red Soda. If anybody out there has ever heard of Big Red Soda or Big Red drink, please type Big Red in the chat. That's something that I grew up with. I think it's a regional delicacy. It's sort of a red-colored cream soda, which I just grew up drinking this stuff by the gallon after baseball games and what have you. So if you're in a place where the known customary celebratory drink is Big Red, drink Big Red. But for the most part, we do wine. And so went on kind of a tangent there about wine. The important thing is that to observe this commandment of remembering the Sabbath, we commemorate the Sabbath in its beginning and its end. In the beginning, we say Kiddush, and in the end, we have the ritual of Havdalah, where we have a braided candle that looks kind of like a torch, and we have spices to smell, and a cup of wine, asterisk, your mileage may vary, and we look at our hands in the light. But that is the essence of remembering Shabbat, that is commemorating its beginning and its end. We remember it by marking the moment that it comes in and marking the moment that it goes out, according to Maimonides. And that is how we Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. If you want to say, okay, I'm going to keep all the 10 Commandments, and it says, remember the Sabbath day. If you say Kiddush in the beginning of Shabbat and you say Havdalah at the end of Shabbat, you're Yotze. Your responsibility is fulfilled. So let's see what's going on. Oh, we got some people throwing in the Big Red. I hope you're not just egging me on. You've actually heard of this stuff. This weekend, God willing, I'm going to Texas for my sister's wedding, and I plan to pick up some Big Red in y'all's honor. So thank you for that. I really love it. Let's see. Somebody's talking about cassava flour for challah. People have been talking a lot about challah recipes in the Jew Curious community lately, how to get around, if you've got gluten allergies and things like that. So thanks for this stuff. Danielle is saying, love to know more about the prayers, how to cook Shabbat meals, etc. I'm super interested to learn. So let's just jump into the second thing, which bears on that. The second way to celebrate Shabbat is Shamor et HaShabbat. That's the repetition of the 10 Commandments in Sefer Devarim, or the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 5. It says you should protect the Sabbath day. And how we protect the Sabbath day is all of those kind of don'ts that we hear about, right? If we're going to keep the Sabbath day holy, we make room for the holiness, the rest, the relaxation, the joy of Shabbat by setting aside other things that we do 6 days a week. And how we do that setting aside and kind of mark boundaries for Shabbat is by refraining from what are called melachot or malacha, the skilled labor for example. When it says, don't work on Shabbat in the Torah, it actually talks quite a bit about it in this week's Parsha in Vayakel. We set aside these normal weekday activities, and that is how we protect the rest, and not the rest of Shabbat as in the remainder, but we protect Shabbat rest, we protect Shabbat sanctity by setting things aside that we can take care of in the rest of the week. And it is actually in this week's Parsha where they make the connection between the prohibition on work during Shabbat and the various activities that went on in building the Mishkan, in building the portable sanctuary or the tabernacle. And in the Mishnah, Masechet Shabbat, chapter 7, Mishnah 2 or Mishnah Bet, it lists all of the different things that you're not supposed to do on Shabbat. And it's things like, planting and harvesting and weaving and tanning leather and hitting things with a hammer. And it gets like, some of it seems a little vague, some of it seems very, very specific. But this is the rabbis of the classical period, their attempt at delineating what qualified as work. And it doesn't mean no walking to shul, even though it might be a long way. People say, oh man, I'm supposed to be resting. Why am I walking so far to the synagogue? I should be driving instead. Work here has a very specific definition and context. In general, how we protect Shabbat is by refraining from things that are either creative or destructive. The principle is that God created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day, God saw that it was good and just decided to desist from creation, desist from changing things. And so we try to refrain from those activities that change the world in some respect. You should always, try to change the world. That's a good thing to do. I realized as soon as I said that. All of us are, I believe, partners in the ongoing creation of the world. But on Shabbat, we get a day off from that. So generally, we refrain from doing things that change the world in some material, physical capacity. And that means, building things or doing our professions and earning money and things like that. And we also refrain from destroying things, because you can change the world by creating something. You can change the world by destroying something that somebody else created. So we don't break things down. We don't light fires. We don't burn things. We refrain from things that change the world in a material way. We just kick back and relax. And so that's the essence of protecting Shabbat. And this is one of the hard ones, especially for people who are new to a spiritual practice of Shabbat. It can be totally overwhelming when they say, oh, all these things that I used to do all the time, took them for granted, always checking my phone, checking my bank balance, answering emails from the boss because, goodness knows I'm expected to do that at all times, or who knows what would happen. That's difficult to stop doing. And this list can seem onerous, and it could feel like more work than the work that it's saving us from. However, I just want to give this encouragement to people who are trying to adopt a Shabbat practice and find themselves bumping into these rules, these don'ts, these naughty no-nos, by trying to do one at a time. Right? If you try to do everything at once, that can overwhelm you and lead you, as earnest as you are, if you try to do everything at once and you fail and you feel like a failure, that may make you stop trying. And so my advice to people who are taking on the Shabbat spiritual practice for the first time is to ease into it. Pick one thing that you're going to try to no longer do on Shabbat. Maybe don't go shopping, don't do things that involve money, right? Don't do things that involve commerce. That was my favorite thing about adopting Shabbat practice, is that I no longer had to go to the mall with my family on Saturday. This is just me. I'm an agoraphobe. I hate, looking for parking. And so the freedom from going to the mall was actually a huge blessing for me. So pick one thing and then try that out, and try it out for a couple of weeks. And then, 3-4 weeks in, pick one more thing. Say, I'm not going to check any email from work, specifically from like my office. I'm going to set that aside. They can hear from me on Saturday night after sundown. You know, like if you're a doctor, if you're, you know, awaiting a kidney transplant or something, if you're a fireman on duty, you know, you can check your work email because you might actually be saving somebody's life or your own. However, this is a test for you as a free person to let some things go for approximately 25 hours and add those gradually so that it's not overwhelming. And before you know it, you may actually start to feel like a free person. And you know, not to paint too broad a brush here, but for me, that's really what a Jewish life is all about. Like, we were slaves in Egypt, we were rescued, we were never slaves again. And part of that was saying Shabbat is a special day. Free people get to take a day off if they want to. And so this is how we protect that freedom, by giving up on certain things that might impinge upon it. So we've covered remember or commemorate with Kiddush and Havdalah. We've got protect the Sabbath by refraining from these activities that distract us and draw us into creating or destroying, which we don't need to do all the time. And before we get into honor and delight, or kavod and oneg, I'm going to go to the chat real quick. Let's see. Carla says, do you have cheer wine in your part of Texas? I remember cheer wine. The first time I ever encountered that was at a vending machine in Alabama. We're talking about, you know, who knew talking about Shabbat we were going to be talking about regional variations in soda availability. And I say soda, that is probably more of a mid-Atlantic or Northeast way, because I've lived in those places too. In, you know, some places call it pop. In Texas, we just call it Coke. Everything. It could be 7-Up, could be Dr. Pepper. It's just all called Coke. But who knew we'd be talking about that this evening? Let's see. We have cheer wine. You know, we have starting out with baby steps. I highly recommend it. Whitney says, I unplugged completely for last Shabbat. The peace I felt was amazing. And so high five, Whitney. I remember us discussing that in the Jew Curious School community and elsewhere. I was really, really proud of you, really happy for you. And, you know, if you go, I'll just use I language. What I like to do is take my my phone and my laptop. These are the two things that I use most often. I'm using my laptop right now to make this video. I use my phone all the time for all sorts of reasons. But I have a special drawer that I put my laptop and my phone in that drawer for Shabbat. I'm not always perfect. Sometimes, you know, I'll check things. I know when I was a rabbi at a synagogue, even I would sometimes carry my phone with me, not to use it, but out of security, because it was a small place where I was the first person there in the morning and I was the last person to leave. And I never knew, every once in a while there was somebody just kind of loitering who was a suspicious character. And so I'll confess, as a rabbi, I was carrying my phone on Shabbat because, God forbid, there was some sort of emergency that I had to deal with. And I wouldn't use it. I wouldn't text people and things like that. Nowadays, I get most Shabbats off, except when I don't. But I like to leave my phone where I can't reach it. And so, out of sight, out of mind, I put it in a drawer. I put my laptop in the drawer right before we light candles and have dinner and say Kiddush and all that stuff. And then I wait for it to get dark again. And I take my phone and my laptop out of the drawer. They are still there. The world is still outside sending me emails, waiting for responses and stuff. And I'll say I've yet to suffer any major losses or let anybody down from refraining from emails, phone calls, etc. on Shabbat. So let's see. Kathy says, I use grape kombucha. Kombucha? I use grape kombucha instead of wine. I think that's still hagafen. I think that's, you still say grape hagafen because the essence of that is grape juice. So we've got Lexi is in the house. I remember Lexi is here from NZ. I think that means New Zealand. And that's fantastic. So we've got Australia, New Zealand, Cyprus, Florida, California, all very nice, warm places right now. So God forbid anybody's like snowed out of seeing this live stream. So let's move on a little bit. We're going to talk about our friend Yeshayahu, the prophet Isaiah, who says to us that, on Shabbat, you will be blessed if you are able to turn aside from business. And that's a separate thing, kind of related to the Shemor. It says if you can, set aside your worldly occupation and call Shabbat an honor and a delight, then things will go well for you. And so we're going to talk about honor, or kavod, and delight, oneg, but let's first talk about honor. And so how do we honor Shabbat? Now, just to wake up my friends here in the chat, I'll say, what does it mean to honor a person? Let's say you had a special guest coming over to your house, and it's a dignitary, a VIP, somebody who doesn't normally come to your house, and it's a big honor to have them. How would you then honor that person? How would you act differently, or dress differently, or something? What would you do different if you wanted to honor a special human being who is paying you a visit? So let's throw up some answers in the chat here, if you will. I know there's a little bit of a lag, so I have to do a bit of a song and dance, a little bit of hold music. Sorry, I was listening to Bossa Nova during dinner tonight. So how would you honor a person? And while those are coming in, I'll just throw out some things from the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, where it says on Shabbat we should dress differently than we normally dress. Like we should wear, at the very least, clean clothes. Like if you're not usually wearing clean clothes, make sure you're wearing clean clothes on Shabbat. There's another halacha that says you should do your laundry not on Friday, but on Thursday. This comes from a time where there were no automatic electric or gas dryers. So people, they said, don't, if you're washing your clothes on Friday, you might still be hanging them up by Friday night. And that's work. So you don't want to be doing that. So do your laundry on Thursday so that you have clean clothes on Friday evening when Shabbat comes in. You should wear nicer clothes, right? And already Natalie says you should clean lol, right? When somebody's coming over, first thing you do, you square everything away. You put everything away. You take your socks off the lampshade. You get the kids' Legos back in the room so that they can step on them instead of you or your guests. You clean. And yes, that's something that many people do for Shabbat. They do a special, it's not Pesach, right? It's not like a deep cleaning, but everything should be tidy. Everything should be pleasant where you live. People put out special white tablecloths for Shabbat dinner. This is a common practice. In fact, I remember studying in Jerusalem and walking through or by Mea Sharim, and out balcony windows, there were these long white tablecloths hanging during the week because they had been used for Shabbat on these big Shabbat tables, and then people would wash them and then hang them off the balcony to dry. So it's just like white banners everywhere. So you have a special tablecloth. You have special dishes. And I'm going to caveat this. All of this is sort of according to your means, right? So you don't have to be rich to celebrate Shabbat. You don't have to go into debt or break the bank or anything like that to celebrate Shabbat. You should just put out the nicest stuff that you reasonably can, right? So if you have a slightly nicer set of dishes, put them out for Shabbat. If you have a white tablecloth, put it out for Shabbat. If you have clothes that are nicer than the clothes you wear every day, put those on for Shabbat. Provided they're comfortable, because you have to rest as well. So you should just kind of take everything up a notch in terms of dignity and honor, because that's how you would welcome a special person into your life. And on Shabbat, it's as if we're welcoming a queen or a king or a bride, this special presence into our lives. And so we honor that presence by sprucing up, right? You wash your face, wash your hands, put on some slightly nicer clothes. But even there, it's sort of dependent on one's means. Even in the Mishnah Berurah, a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, it says, look, what if you only have one shirt? It says you should wear a different garment on Shabbat, but if you only own one garment, it says then you just kind of, maybe roll down your sleeves or roll up your sleeves or do something different with it that shows you regard the Sabbath day differently. And that is how we honor Shabbat. I'm going to jump back into the chat, see what's going on here. We clean, we tidy up the environment, we cook in advance. That brings us right into what's coming up next, which is oneg. And this is a bit of a combo move. This is oneg and shamor. How do we delight in Shabbat? And many ways we delight in Shabbat. We have delightful things. Like we have special food that we don't normally eat during the week. You know, it was recently I was at a potluck for Shabbat dinner, and there was an Israeli family, and somebody brought a dish, and the husband said, "Oh, that's my wife's pashtita." And I'm like, pashtita, that's a thing? Like, I've read about pashtita. Like, pashtita, it's basically like a quiche. But the only other time I've ever heard the word pashtita was from the Shulchan Aruch, a code of Jewish law from about the 17th century, and it said, on Shabbat, you should have pashtita. And pashtita was just a name for a quiche, or like an egg dish back then. But apparently still Israelis are using that word for quiche. So, but you should have special things. For us, for Shabbat, we have challah. Often my wife will bake challah, or we'll get challah if there's no time to bake challah. We'll have a night, special dessert. If we don't have dessert during the week, we'll have dessert on Shabbat. We make it nice. That's sort of our best dinner of the week. We often eat as a family dinner. Thank God we have that privilege that we'll eat together during the week. But on Friday, we make it a point to all be around the table and all having the best meal of the week on Friday night. That is how we both honor Shabbat, but also delight in it. But there's one special thing that we associate with Shabbat that is core to this principle of oneg Shabbat. And how do we delight in Shabbat? And I'll ask, this is one thing that we haven't really talked about yet tonight, but it's essential to many it's essential to many people's experience of Shabbat, and that is lighting candles. And some may associate this with Zachor, because in many households, you light the candles, and then when dinner starts, you say Kiddush. And so if you do nothing else on Friday night, you are lighting candles and making Kiddush. So these two things seem intertwined. However, the essence of lighting Shabbat candles is about oneg. It's about delight. Why? Because candles are pretty, right? Having a candlelight dinner is a nice thing. In periods of our history where having any light on at all after the sun went down was expensive because there's olive oil and candles were in short supply or whatever, if you only lit 2 candles all week, they would be your Friday night candles, so that you could stay up a little bit later than normal and have a nice dinner with family and friends on Shabbat. And so at the very core, the very barest measure of delighting in Shabbat, it's lighting Shabbat candles, and so that we can have a nice dinner by candlelight. There are other ways, you play games, you spend time with friends, you invite people over. Anything that makes the day delightful in a in a dignified way is a nice thing to do on Shabbat. I will mention a special thing. It's 8:30 at night here. All the kids are in bed, and so there's an adult way to delight in Shabbat as well, and that is tashmish hamita. It's in rabbinic language, using the bed, which means trying to think how many embarrassing euphemisms I could use. Marital relations. How about that one? So having sex with somebody that you are in a committed relationship with is a mitzvah on Shabbat, and it's part of this category of oneg, of delighting in Shabbat. So if you are blessed to have a committed partner in your life, and I'm not going to say married, not married, whatever the situation is, I tend to endorse committed relationships versus casual relationships, just my jam. But if you have somebody you're in a serious committed relationship with, enhancing that relationship, strengthening that relationship by sexual time together is a good thing to do on Shabbat, right? It's one of the key mitzvahs of Shabbat if you have that in your life. And so if you're looking for an excuse, I highly recommend letting Shabbat be your excuse. That it's another way to delight in the Sabbath. So with that, I'm going to take a look at Shabbat. Oh, cook in advance. I want to thank you for reminding me of that, Kathy. That this is kind of a combo move, like I said. You should have nice food on Shabbat as a part of Oneg Shabbat or delighting in Shabbat, but you should also, in the spirit of Shemor at Yom HaShabbat, of protecting the Sabbath day, you should cook it ahead of time. And so one of those things that we don't do on Shabbat, according to the traditional rules, is we don't cook. This is related to the activity of the construction of the Mishkan, or the tabernacle. They would cook loaves of bread for the showbread sacrifice. All of that stuff was supposed to be done ahead of time because in the ancient world, as today, a significant amount of energy, work, what have you, of human activity was food prep, was cooking things, and cooking specifically means taking something that is raw and applying heat to it in order to transform it into something edible, or bringing water to a boil is also considered cooking. And so I recommend that we refrain from doing that on Shabbat. However, you can make all sorts of things before Shabbat, and then it's permissible to warm them up during Shabbat. If you have a Shabbat-friendly and Shabbat-safe heat source, then it's okay to warm food that has already been cooked. Right? There's a halakhic principle like ein bishul achar bishul. Once something's cooked, you can't really cook it any more than it's already cooked. I mean, like, yeah, you can put it on something and it'll burn, but once it's cooked, it's permissible to heat it up again if that would be pleasant for you to eat it warm. One of my favorite Shabbat dishes. This is a good time of year for it, but we usually only make it when my sons are in town, and that is cholent. There's this particular Jewish delicacy, the Ashkenazi name for which is cholent. The more Sephardi name for it is chamin, or there's like Israeli Hebrew, we'll call it chamin, which just means hot stuff. And it's a special stew that people make for Shabbat, whereby you can take all the ingredients, put them in a pot before Shabbat starts, put it on the heat before Shabbat starts, and leave it there. And it's one way, and you do this with like a crock pot or some kind of slow cooker that doesn't need to be tended. You just set it and forget it, as it says in the crock pot commercials. You put all this stuff in there. It starts cooking before Shabbat, which means it's okay for it to continue to cook if you initiate the cooking before Shabbat. And it's a great way to have a hot meal, let's say, for Shabbat lunch, when normally you're not cooking other things. And there are just so many different regional variations on this. The essential is that it's a stew that people would make so that they could have hot food on Shabbat without breaking any of the rules for Shabbat. And in some places, it's more of a potato base or a barley base. In places like Southern Europe and North Africa, there might be more beans involved. Different people use different kinds of meat. You can do it with no meat at all. But this is a Shabbat dish that is very, I think, specific to the Jewish people. I don't know anybody else who does this, but it was essentially a recipe invented for celebrating Shabbat. And that's a cholent. And if you want to Google recipes, I think you normally spell that Cholent or Chulent, or you look up a chamin, which is like an Hamin. So you can look those up. It's a great thing to do. Like I said, I only really do that when my sons are in town, because I have the kind of a crock pot that's like a 5-pound capacity, and if we don't normally eat that much cholent, so we would make it, and then we'd have leftovers for the whole week, and you don't want to eat week-old cholent. But when my sons are in town, we can polish the whole thing off before dinner time on Saturday, normally. So let's see what other questions we have in here. Mostly just people chatting with each other, which is my favorite thing in the world to see here in the Jew Curious community, is people sharing recipes, people telling jokes. Some teachers are mean about, kids gossiping in the back of the class. I love it. I love that this community is talking to each other and sharing ideas, answering each other's questions. Let me just look up here. We've got T. Aharon. That's a new one for me, a new person in this community. It says, Gentiles are not required to observe Zachor Shabbat. So yes, these are, I'll say, Jewish mitzvahs that we're talking about, Jewish mitzvot. These were, commandments given to the Jewish people by God for a specific purpose of elevating our lives, of making our lives special. And so Whereas it's a nice thing for anybody to observe Shabbat. And I've seen this. Lots of non-Jewish people and communities are saying, hey, the Jews really have something there. It's nice to take a day off. People are taking these, social media breaks and things like that voluntarily. If you're not Jewish, you don't, let's say, have to do the same things that we do. But I'm also not going to say it's off limits for you, right? These are technologies that the Jewish people have developed to elevate our lives, to set us apart as a free people, people with free will, a people of self-determination, and of no overarching sovereignty except for our relationship with God. So I just want to endorse, if anybody out there is not Jewish but wants to try these things out, absolutely try them out and see what difference they make in your life. Kathy asked, we were talking earlier about Oneg Shabbat in the sense of, let's say, marital relations. And Kathy asks, what if you create a baby? Is that considered breaking Shabbat because you are creating something? I'm going to say no. Specifically, I mean, you're not breaking any rules there. If you create a baby, Mazel Tov, God bless you, and I wish all of you well. But this raises an important point, and this goes to Shabbat. It also goes to ethics of sexuality in Judaism. Sex in Judaism isn't just for procreation. Judaism is, by and large, in a dignified way, a sex-positive culture, whereby sex isn't just for procreation. The tradition recognizes it as ways for a committed couple to strengthen their relationship through physical intimacy. And so there are all sorts of stories of couples in the Torah and in the Tanakh who are barren, right, who can't have babies. And some people go through phases of that and they have a baby and it's a miracle. And like that's how Hannah had Shmuel or the prophet Samuel. But that doesn't mean that the couple isn't supposed to be intimate. Even if they know they can't have babies, couples are still supposed to be intimate if it's healthy for them to do so. And so this case of Oneg Shabbat, of physical intimacy, isn't about making babies. It's just about having a good time with somebody you love in the context of this day of rest, which we are to call a delight. So thank you for bringing that up. Let's see what else is going on here. Really appreciate people's questions. Teresa says, I love cholesterol. Then you will love cholent, because cholent is usually all for it. So thank you, everybody, for your questions tonight. We've been going up for about 47 minutes, and this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. Shabbat is something, the observance of which has changed my life for the better. It's changed my family life, how we structure our week around Shabbat so that we can be together. And I know my wife might disagree with me because I'm a rabbi, and that means I'm often working on Shabbat in the sense of I have responsibilities to a community. I lead prayers and things like that, but I only lead prayers that I would be probably, praying anyway. And so sometimes I don't get to take off as much time as I want to take off. However, we find ways to make Shabbat special. We turn off the computers and do board games, for example, or we'll go to the park, take extra naps. So, and I say that to say, if you don't, again, to go back to this theme, if your life is structured in such a way that you can't do everything perfectly by the rule book completely, I strongly suggest that you don't let that stand in the way of trying one thing or two things or three things gradually, because that's how, in my experience, people most successfully build a spiritual practice of Shabbat. One bite at a time, right? One little thing at a time. And over time it accumulates. And when I work with students who come from a background of Shabbat non-observance and then try these little things and eventually build up a Shabbat practice, they describe how it changes them. How it makes them think differently about the rest of the week, how it makes them feel differently during the rest of the week. So don't try to do everything at once. Take one little piece at a time and see how your life changes gradually. Anything worth doing is worth taking your time for. And so just to recap, tonight we've talked about 4 different ways to celebrate Shabbat. We celebrate Shabbat by remembering the Shabbat, remembering the Sabbath day, remembering Shabbat, and we remember it by marking its beginning and marking its end with holiness through Kiddush in the beginning of Shabbat and Havdalah at the end of Shabbat. We also Shamor et Yom HaShabbat. We protect the Sabbath day. All of these list of rules and don'ts and no and all that stuff, which for some people from the outside looks like, it's restrictive and it's onerous. Those are actually there to protect the sanctity and the rest of the Sabbath day. Those are there for us, not there despite or against us. We also honor the Sabbath day by treating our space, by treating ourselves, by treating our guests, just in a slightly more dignified way than normal, at least, right? Just make it nice. We refrain from talking about business. We refrain from maybe telling certain kinds of jokes. We refrain from, idle or demeaning or, gossipy kind of things. We just pretend like we're in the presence of royalty, because in some sense we are. And we dress differently. We have nicer food. We have nicer table linens. We have, can you eat Shabbat off of paper plates? You can absolutely eat Shabbat off of paper plates. And sometimes that's our family's decision. Like, okay, we're going to celebrate Shabbat by not doing the dishes. And we're having a bunch of people over, so let's have paper plates so that we don't have to do the dishes afterwards. Or you can have really nice dishes. Or you can get really nice plasticware or paper plates. However it is that makes the day both dignified and a day of rest for you, that's the way to honor Shabbat. And finally, we delight. It's not just about napping or not doing stuff or, just boring sitting there. Make it fun. Have a candlelight dinner. When do we get to have candlelight dinners anymore, right? Have a candlelight dinner. Have some intimate time with your beloved. Play board games with the kids. Just play Cards Against Humanity. I have it on good authority that Cards Against Humanity, if anybody's familiar with this game, was invented as a Shabbat game because there's no, handling, pencils or keeping score or anything. So that's just a little rumor that I'm passing on. I know I'm not supposed to gossip, but look it up sometime. I think Cards Against Humanity was invented as a Shabbat game by Shabbat observant people. So remember it, protect it, honor it, and delight. Have fun with it. And that is how you celebrate Shabbat in 4 different ways. So I'll stick around the chat for a little bit longer if anybody has any more questions. Let's see. Some good questions coming up here. Let's see. Somebody says, has he done a video on being from an LGBT? I have not. However, I've seen a lot of those discussions in different communities that I'm part of, so that could be something worthy of a video topic as well. I have strong opinions when it comes to Jewish law and honoring the dignity of people who are created in God's image and are part of the LGBT community or disposition or however you call it. So I do have strong opinions about that many rabbis don't agree with me on. However, happy to share that stuff at another time, like another video topic. Let's see. We have Danielle is in here, Natalie's in here, Kathy's in here. Listen, guys, I really appreciate your doing this learning with me. I know we've been doing a lot of stuff together lately, and people have really been hanging on. And so it's always my honor and delight. See, I used 2 Shabbat words in there. It is my honor and delight to remember to teach these things for you. And, always protect your computer with antivirus software. That's about as far as I could stretch that. So, thank you for doing this learning with me tonight, everybody. And until next time, peace.